All right, we're just going to wait for all the attendees to come on through the waiting room. I can see the names are popping up quick, and so we should have a good turnout today, and we'll get started shortly once I can see there's a slowdown in the attendees coming through the waiting room. And so in the meantime, we will get started shortly, but I can certainly see quite a few names coming through the attendees list for the panel. All right, we'll just give it a couple more moments just for anybody else who wants to come through with the link, and then we'll get started shortly. All right, well, I think we should get started. I think that's enough time for people to come through. And so hello, everyone who is online. We can certainly see you there. My name is Brendan Zhu. I am the Manager for Workplace Relations and Legal Policy here at Restaurant and Catering. And I'm joined with me here today, Rowena McIver, who is Head of Sales at foundU. And today, we've decided to do a seminar and a webinar on annualized salary and the 101 basics of understanding it and why it is an important thing for you to consider for your business. And so whether you're watching here live now or if you're watching on the recording, if you're watching here live, you have the opportunity to ask questions as well. By all means, ask questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions. But yeah, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, the annualized salary is something that is of great interest to our members, but also great confusion. And we certainly recognize that fact that it is quite complex. It is a tool that can be used, and when used well, can help and assist for a variety of different reasons. But of course, there are some unique challenges amongst the plethora of different things that we all go through in the hospitality industry and trying to understand compliance and paying wages and paying salaries. So as a brief overview of the webinar, I will go on and explain a little bit about what the annualized salary arrangement is, why some members might want to use it, why some members might not want to use it, some of the pros and cons of both, how it works, some of the obligations that you would need to do, and things to consider. And then afterwards, we will have Rowena from foundU showcase some of the tools and equipment and the software to use, in particular for the annualized and the annual reconciliation for the annualized salary arrangement. We know that's a big question and a big question mark on the complexity of this approach. And foundU, who are involved with a variety of different things related to workforce planning, software, payroll, timesheets, we'll be able to show and demonstrate a simpler way to do compliance and a simpler way to perform the annual reconciliation for the salary arrangement. So that's something that Rowena will cover on later on. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the Q&A for our members. So if you have any questions, by all means, post it in the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to answer those questions live. And if not, certainly give the IR hotline number a ring and be more than happy to assist with you for any questions and further follow-up that you might have. But yeah, starting on to what is the annualized salary approach. And so as members would know, when you're paying wages to your staff, there are a few different ways to do it. And so for a segment of our membership, you pay in accordance with the award minimum rates. And so you do timesheets and you do check-ins and clock-out. And for some members, it's paying exactly the amount of hours they've worked. So if they worked X amount of hours on Monday and then this on Tuesday, they did overtime on Wednesday, and they worked a Saturday shift. Some of our members with a weekly, let's say, pay cycle, we just calculate the hours in hindsight and pay in accordance with the award. Now, one of the things that members find, of course, with that is there is a lot of admin on a week in, week out basis, of looking through the timesheets. I'm trying to plan and roster plan for the weeks ahead, for trying to anticipate busy periods, for overtime, for sick leave, for someone who calls in sick and needs a replacement. And as a result, someone else takes on an extra shift. And with this approach, there is greater uncertainty in terms of your expected cash outflow. There is greater uncertainty with the hours that you might have. And that's why some members want to consider what they call an annualized salary approach. And what the annualized salary approach is, you pay a 25% buffer of the minimum ordinary rate. And you pay that 25% buffer on top of that rate. And as a result of that, you pay what is, the full-time salary for the year. And you break it up into, let's say, 52 weeks. So it's a weekly pay cycle. Or if you do a fortnightly pay cycle, you divide by obviously 26. And that way you pay the same amount the whole time. You pay the minimum ordinary hourly rate based on the full-time rate, and then you add in the 25% buffer. What that aims to do is that it aims to offset the overtime hours that they may work. It aims to offset, any Saturday or Sunday shifts, those penalty rates, those meal break penalties. That's what it aims to do, so that when you schedule in your roster, when you think about and you try and do some workforce planning, and when you want some consistency in terms of cash outflow, the annualized salary arrangement allows you to have a consistent, let's say, weekly paycheck to your employee who is on an annualized salary, regardless of how many hours they may have worked in that given week or penalty rates that they might have incurred. Now, one of the things with the annualized salary arrangement is, as a result of that, you do need to perform an annual reconciliation. And this is the big thing, and this is the key thing. And I often use two very extreme examples to consider a spectrum of sorts to help illustrate this point. So, for example, on one hand, you've got someone who works Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, without ever incurring overtime, without ever working any public holidays. And they're on an annualized salary and they're paid that 25% buffer. It's a very extreme example, and I get that. This person, if they got paid in accordance with the award, with the bare minimum hourly rates, they would never have incurred any of the penalty rates. They never worked overtime. They never worked a Saturday or Sunday. They never worked a public holiday in their life. And in this event, they would have been, under the salary approach, let's say, overpaid, because they got a 25% buffer, whereas if they were paid in accordance with the award, they would not have gotten that 25% buffer. Now, on the other hand, on the other extreme of this spectrum is someone who works, and I use a very extreme example, 2 20-hour shifts, one on Saturday and one on Sunday. And they work every penalty rate under the sun. Every public holiday, they work it. They work 2 20-hour shifts, so obviously there's overtime there. It's a Saturday and Sunday rate, so obviously there are certain penalty rates there. Now, if they were on the annualized salary, which is a 25% buffer, it is fair to say, clearly, this person would have been underpaid if they were paid in accordance with the award. If they were paid in accordance with the award, they would have gotten the Sunday penalty rates, the Sunday penalty rates, or the public holidays. They would have gotten overtime. And what happens there, you perform the annual reconciliation after 12 months, and then you have to back pay that underpayment. Now, what would they have gotten if they worked under the award? Now, I use these two extreme examples on the opposite end of the spectrum to illustrate a point that somewhere in the middle, there are certain sweet spots. It might be, let's say, use the 20-hour shifts example. It might have been 15. It might have been 12-hour shifts. It might have been working 40 hours a week. It might have been working 45 hours a week. They might have been doing Saturdays. They might have been doing Sundays. And there are obviously millions of combinations and permutations out there to trigger that certain threshold where they would have moved over to an underpayment situation. And that is why the annual reconciliation is so important. And that is why the Fair Work has record-keeping obligations for employers as well. So that if you were to perform a reconciliation for your annualized salary and compare, would they have been paid higher or lower under the award? If it was higher under the award than the annualized salary, you would have to do some back pay. Now, some members, and I explain this on the hotline, and they go, well, what's the point then, right? What's the point if I have to do an annualized reconciliation anyway? And if I've underpaid staff, I have to back pay them. Yet if I've overpaid them and they would have gone less under the award, I don't get it back. The member doesn't get it back. The employer doesn't get it back. And I think that's a very fair point, which is why some members, in spite of the compliance benefits of annualized salary and the consistency and the cash flow, they want to do the week in, week out paycheck and calculations. And that's fair enough. If that's your business position and that's more appropriate for your context, by all means. But there are certain members out there who prefer doing an annual reconciliation as a one-stop shop, or they prefer at least knowing there's a consistency of cash flow that they know they can budget for. And they therefore need a budget at the end of the year if there's any underpayments that they may need to do. Another thing that we speak to our members about is before you realize when you do the annual reconciliation that you might be at risk of an underpayment, you can certainly do a quarterly check or quarterly audit. Now, if you can see yourself as being ahead at the 1 quarter mark, at Q1 or Q2 or Q3, and there's a bit of buffer, you can give this particular staff a replacement shift if someone's calls in sick. If there's a public holiday coming up, then you can give this staff member that public holiday shift. But if you can tell, hang on, at the moment, they're doing too many hours and they're projected by the end of the year to be underpaid, well, if someone calls in shift, you're not going to offer it to this employee. You might offer it to someone else, or you might give it to a casual. Or, if there's a public holiday coming up, you might give it to another employee as well. And that quarterly order will be important. And Rowena shortly will share a bit about how you can do that check and how you can do that reconciliation. So those were the main 101s in terms of the annualized salary approach. That's why some members would do it. It's why some members won't do it. And the big part, of course, is the annualized and the annual reconciliation, which you need to do at the end of 12 months. And so now I'm just going to hand it over to Rowena, who's going to share a bit about foundU and some of the software services that they have for payroll, for compliance, for timesheets, and how it all interrelates and connects with the annual reconciliation as part of the annualized salary approach. Thank you, Rowena.
Thanks, Brendan, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And for those who are watching at a later stage, really appreciate your time and know that this is an important topic, particularly for your sector, and it's a complex one and one that takes a lot of resources to try and manage. By way of background, just to introduce foundU, we're an Australian-based software company, and we are an end-to-end system. So we are all things people and payroll. And what do we mean by that? We simply mean that it starts with employee onboarding, into scheduling, time and attendance, payroll, and then of course off the back of that comes all of the reporting. I will share this with Brendan, and he will share it with the broader team and make it available to you. But we've certainly included some information there that show you what it looks like in terms of a user experience for employees to go through and self-onboard, be able to see when they're working and manage leave, before getting into rostering. And this is the piece of the puzzle that really talks strongly to understanding what it means when you decide to employ somebody on an annualized salary basis and how that compares to the award. And at foundU, we've spent a lot of time investing into our award engine and making tools available to people who are doing that scheduling, bringing a lot of that information forward in the journey so that you have a very clear line of sight to understand, well, if I put somebody into a position on a Monday and we set their time, start and finish time is exactly the same in this particular example that I'm showing on the screen. I'll show you in the live system shortly. But I've got 2 employees in this particular roster. I've got Jane, who's employed strictly under the award, and that will pull through and obviously pick up that there are penalty rates on a Saturday and a Sunday, as opposed to Joe, who's on an annualised salary, which simply pays him the same rate for 38 hours. Once he hits that 38 hours, the system then stops paying him because he's salaried, he's on a flat rate, and there he stops. This particular example that I'm showing on screen, we have the person working 6 days a week, which is obviously not ideal. They're working 55.5 hours, but we recognise that sometimes things happen in the life of the business, and that's what needs to happen to keep things ticking over. For this particular example, Jane, who was under the award, would have received $988 as ordinary time earnings. And then she received overtime because she's gone well past that 38 hours. So her overtime wages were $891.14, taking her to a total of $1,879 for the week. The annualized salary person, by comparison, sat at $1,458, sorry. So you can see there's quite a discrepancy. Now, as Brendan said earlier, if you are conscious of mixing up the Saturdays and the Sundays and the public holidays and not simply getting those annualised salary people to work all of those hours, things should even out in the wash. It's where that person is continuously working long days, on the weekends, late at nights, when there are penalties that come into play, that you're going to find that you're going to run foul of those annualised salary provisions, and you'll have an underpayment issue. There's a few things that are important though when we're talking about annualised salary. The first is making sure that we're capturing time and attendance, and we have a couple of tools within the foundU system to manage that. So even when a person is on an annualised salary and they're simply being paid for the 38 hours a week, the system will still want to know the actual hours that they worked on a per day basis. So that's meeting that very first requirement of annualised salaries, that there's an obligation on you as the employer to maintain a clear record of actual hours worked. The other thing that these tools will allow you to do is not only capture start and finish times, but also did they take a break? And importantly, what time did they take that break? Because obviously there's another layer of complexity in your award, that if people are not taking breaks within certain timeframes, that the award requires that you pay penalty rates until they have a break. In our system, it goes through a workflow. So you would roster the person, create the schedule. You'll then capture the hours that they work, which feeds through into a shift approval process. And it's at this point that you would be approving hours for payment. Let's jump into the live system and we'll show you what it looks like in the live system. So if we go into the roster, here's my example. So this is the example we showed you previously. Jane, full-time award versus Joe. And you can see that I can expand this view to drill down and see what it's costing on a by day basis. So as Brendan said, absolutely. If the person is working Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, then obviously they're considerably better off with the loaded rate, 25%, that gets built into that annualised salary. This is where we come unstuck. We come unstuck on Saturday, where we've got 25% loading for ordinary time earnings before going into overtime rates, because they've gone past the 38 hours. And you can see by Sunday, we're completely shot out of the water, because under the annualised salary, the person's already hit their 38 hours. There's no further payment for them. Under the award, they're continuing to get paid. Not only are they continuing to be paid, they're continuing to be paid at a much higher rate with the overtime rates. In our world, when you're building out the rosters, your scheduling managers will have access to this information even before they've published the roster. So this lets your scheduling managers make informed decisions around what's it going to cost, should we be trying to switch that person out, are we incurring overtime that we would really prefer not to incur. Let me show you some of the tests that exist in the system. So this is looking at 1 week only. So I'm comparing Jane award versus Joe's salary. When I click in to my view, I can see that in this particular system, and please note people that I haven't captured the breaks. So it's possible that some of these employees were having breaks that fell outside of the break rules, but in this instance, I've simply assumed they've all had their break at the 4th hour. So you can see here, if I hover over each section, it will tell me how the award is paying that person for that period of time. When I get over here into Saturday, it's letting me see the person has exceeded the maximum ordinary hours and therefore it's paying at the penalty rates. And again here on Sunday. As opposed to Joe's salary, and you can see in this particular instance, Joe simply worked Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, got paid the flat rate, taking him to 38 hours at $14.58. That's looking at it simply at a week. Obviously, with the reconciliation, we need to examine much larger data sets. So I could change that, and instead of looking at a week, in this particular example, I've said I'd like to look at it over the last month, which is picking up 5 weeks, which fell into that month period. So when I compare month on month for this particular example, I can see Jane under the award was actually under Joe under the salary. And that's because this particular example, you can see we've mixed the days around. My final test allows me to look at it for the 12 months. So when we've got 12 months worth of data, we're taking into consideration things like leave loading under the awards. We're also picking up public holidays. So when I did this analysis for a 12-month period, Jane under the award was just shy of 80,500, as opposed, I scroll down, to Joe was 76,000. So you can see that is the test in the system that would let you see, okay, I'm falling below those award minimum requirements, and Joe would need a top-up payment at the end of the reporting period to make him whole against the award. And I guess the idea with the system is that you don't get to the end of the 12 months before you're aware of this information, that you can pull this data and say, what happened in the last month? Am I on track? Am I falling below the award minimum? Should I try and change that person's work patterns moving forward? Or perhaps do I need to adjust, and maybe instead of saying it's 25% on the base rate, you might say if this person is going to consistently work a Saturday and a Sunday, what you might decide to do is say, well, let's take them to 35% so that you don't get to the end of the reporting period and have, several $1,000s that you need to find to make them whole against the award. Other tests that exist in our system are things like a labour management report. This is one you can pull at any time. I've done this particular report. I've simply said, look at the data from the end of June to the end of last week, group the data by day, and that just very quickly lets me see how many hours has Joe's salary worked on a Saturday, Sunday. Have I got the mix right? It's simple, it pulls up in a couple of seconds, and it's just going to save you going back and looking back at rosters. How many Saturdays did he clock in? Have we done too many of those particular days? Oops, that one's just bounced out. The final report that I had in my system was the roster summary report. There we go, it's coming back. So the roster summary report, again, I can set my date range. I can decide to group the data, and in this instance, I've grouped it by employee for just Joe's salary and Jane award. And again, it's going to give me a line of sight in terms of how much was each person paid on a per day basis, with the ability to drill down and see exactly how those hours were paid. And whilst we acknowledge that annual salaries are something that is quite common in your particular sector, I think a lot of people use it as a way of recruiting employees as well. There's an expectation that at certain levels they will just be salaried. There's also the ability in the system, if you were to say, look, I don't want to worry about trying to do the annualised salary process and doing the reconciliation at the end of the period. Certainly with a system such as ours, if you were to decide, I'm simply going to pay to the award, the system will do all of those automated calculations for you. So that I guess is another option if you were to say, look, it's all tricky. I could find myself in the position where I've actually overpaid employees with that 25% loading, or if I'm underpaying them, I've still got to make them whole anyway. So the other option is to simply pay per the award. We are very happy at any time to show people through the system, to answer any specific questions that you may have, to talk to how some of our customers are using the system to help manage the staff that they have on annualised salaries, and to present a range of different ways of managing things like toil and RDOs and building that in for people who might be on annualised salary provisions as well.
Thank you, Rowena, and thank you for explaining how that foundU software would work and intersect with the annualised reconciliation for the annualised salary. We do have a question from Hugh, which we'll get to shortly. As mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to pop it in to the Q&A box, and we're more than happy to answer. Joe has a good point. Hugh has a good point where, does Joe not receive annual leave and sick leave entitlements on top of his salary and the impact that would have on him being above the award? Rowena, I might just leave that for you, based on certain assumptions and presumptions you've made for those mock scenarios.
Yes, so Brendan, we had built in that they were basically identical in all respects, except Joe was salaried and was simply paid 38 hours, as opposed to Jane, who was under the award, was paid the penalty rates. Both were receiving leave entitlements, so both were considered full-time employees, and were paying annual and personal leave, and that was consistent across both. So we had taken that out of the equation.
Yeah, so Hugh, it's a good point. The more leave entitlements that are used up, that would narrow the mock scenario, but with certain presumptions, let's say that they were not using any leave, let's say, just for the purposes of illustrating the point. If they were not using any of their leave and they're just accruing this whole time with a big payout, say towards the end, then that would exacerbate the difference between the two as well. But yeah, we certainly recognize with Rowena's scenario of Joe and Jane that there were certain presumptions built in. Being working 55 hours, quite a lot of overtime. If that was on a if that was on a consistent basis, week after week, then again a much higher risk of underpayment there. But the odd week of 55 and then go back to 38, and then occasionally they might do 36 or 35, and then a 40. That would significantly be a lot lower risk. But that's why these tools and softwares allow you to get a good gauge of where you're at with your staff and employees. So we've got another one from Joe, who asked, if an employee is already on annualized salary, can we legally request him to go to an award system, with the preface of with discussion, of course. Look, if that is something the employee consents to and agrees to as well, and you have some sort of modification of the contract, signed by all the parties relevant and involved, and that's something that they were amenable to, by all means, you can have that discussion with him or her. You can have the discussion to ask them if they would be interested in going to the award system and the benefits there as well. And so we certainly recognize with the annualized salary approach, that's why some members of ours would do it anyway. Now, this leads to another point for some of our other members, and certainly this is for some of our larger members, where there's another thing called the exemption rate. And what the exemption rate is, it's similar to the annualized salary, except it's at a much higher premium and a much higher buffer, and it's only applies to level 5s and 6, where you are paying approximately $82,000, $84,000 and above. Now, because you're paying such a high buffer, and this offsets and sets off all overtime penalty rates again, all allowances, meal break penalty, tools and equipment, uniform allowance. The other thing with this one is you do not need to perform an annual reconciliation at all. So that's the main draw card to the exemption rate, which is if you are paying a level 5 and or 6, $82,000 to $84,000 and above, you do not need to perform an annual reconciliation. And so that's something that was introduced this year through our advocacy of the Restaurant Industry Award, which was brought in to place in August and has come into effect. But again, we recognize that is a high premium. It's not for everyone. It's not for all of our members, but certainly for those who are if you're already paying some of your staff members above that $82,000, $84,000 threshold, that's something you might want to consider. Now, if you're paying someone that 25% buffer with the annualized salary, again, that is a minimum. If you're finding that you're doing a lot of Saturdays, Sundays, overtime, public holidays with these staff, it might be your senior chef or front of house manager, the 25% is just the minimum. You are more than welcome to go above and beyond that as well. We've just got another question here from Norman about your example, Rowena, and it showed a comparison of someone on an award versus someone on the annualized salary. And that's the two scenarios that we had. And can the foundU system simulate some sort of award payments based on actual times that were clocked versus a flat 38 hours for a single employee? So someone who, let's say, clocks in at 10 a.m., clocks out at 4 on one day, clocks out at 6 another, clocks in at 5 p.m. one night and clocks out at midnight or whatever it might be. Can the system simulate award payments based on actual times clocked versus the flat 38 hours for a single employee?
So, Norman, the answer to that question is yes. What we would do is we would take a data dump out of the system of the actual clocked time and then re-import that in for the purposes of an award test, so that we would be able to then say, okay, well, based on the actual attendances. Now, sometimes you may manipulate some of those actual clock times slightly because obviously people will clock 10, 15 minutes before they actually start and unpack for the day. And the reverse at the end of the day. So you may do some adjustments to those actual clock stamps to recognise what were the actual approved hours for working purposes, re-import that in, and then run that through the award engine. Certainly though, if you wanted to do tests on the fly, we have the ability, if I was to come, I stopped sharing my screen, let me just share that quickly. At any point in time, you can jump into the system and you can run an award test. Now, rather than using an actual timesheet, you could create a scenario, and some of our customers will actually go through this scenario exercise when they're looking at setting that annualised salary. So for example, you could say, well, I expect the person is going to start at 6 a.m. on a Monday. They're going to go through until 9 p.m. with a 60-minute break. On Friday, I'm going to get them to start at midday, and I'm going to get them to go through until 11:30 p.m. And you can see here, I've got that option of putting in that break time if I wanted to. So I can create a mock scenario. I can then come in here, pick up my award and select my position. So this is where I would be able to say, they're a level 5, they're a level 6. Use the base rate because they're permanent. Come down here and you can see I can go through and I can get the exact same data without having an employee attached to it. So you can see in this particular example, we're triggering overtime on the Monday because they've worked past the max ordinary hours per day. We're picking up shift allowances as per the award. Penalty rates on the weekend. So the same would apply, use the same logic. Obviously, I've just done that scenario for 1 week, but there would be no issues with me importing 12 months worth of data and running the exact same test based on actual timestamps.
Right. Well, I hope that answers that question as well. Rowena, if people are interested in the foundU software, what is the best next steps they can do to be in contact with yourself or your team?
Yeah, best next steps, send us an email, visit our website. There's a demo form in there that comes through to our team. We are always very happy to jump onto a video call with you and listen to what you're doing currently, what are the pain points that you're trying to solve, and then show you how that could be managed with our system. No two foundU platforms are ever the same. We work with customers to make sure that we get a system that makes sense for your business and recognise that every organisation is slightly different, and make sure that the system respects that.
Great. Excellent. Well, I see there are no further questions for any of the attendees. As always, if you do have any questions for me on the IR hotline, feel free to be in touch on 1300 722 878. That's 1300 722 878, and be more than happy to answer any questions as well. And I'll have those slides that Rowena shared earlier and distributed to those who attended as well. And so we hope that answers your question. We hope that that helps and assists. We just got a question here. What's the best website and email for foundU?
Best website is foundU, foundu.com.au. And if you've want to send us an email, either rowena@foundu.com.au or hello@foundu.com.au. They'll both come to us.
Excellent. Well, I have that distributed as well to all those who attended today. Thank you again. I know there's another webinar coming up for our South Australian members on the vaccine situation and the borders reopening. As always, if you have any feedback, any topics you want, we came up with this topic because of the amount of questions I was getting about annualised salary arrangements. So more than happy to respond to any hot topics that the members want answered and do one accordingly as well. But until then, enjoy the rest of your day. and have a good week. Thank you.